Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to ABC Dialogue. This is Grace. Today we're going to talk about TTIP. It stands for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. So I'm going to just give you a few facts on the TTIP. It's a trade and investment agreement under negotiation between EU and the US, and agreement is designed to drive growth and create jobs. And then there are some independent researchers which shows that TTIP actually can boost EU economic and the US economic and the rest of the world. And the talk actually started in July 2013. With me, I have speaker all the way from Belgium. Her name is Julie Cantalou, and she's European Affairs Manager from Friedrich-Naumann Foundation. Hello, Julie.
Hi, how are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
Fine.
So I just gave a brief introduction of TTIP, but then could you kindly elaborate on what TTIP is?
Yeah, well, you said exactly. It stands for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it is about a free trade agreement between the US and the 28 member states of the EU.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning these are the two biggest trading blocs in the world, basically. So it would be the biggest free trade agreement ever negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
And what is a bit peculiar about it, it's not only about reducing tariffs. It's mostly about harmonizing standards, about reducing what they call non-tariff barriers. All the bureaucracy and the regulations on both sides make it really difficult for trade. And so that is the aim, to reduce all this.
So this, I'm sorry, but these two giant, I will say, EU and the US itself came up with this agreement to further and to improve lots of stuff. But who actually came up with this idea of TTIP, Julie?
Oh, this is a very old idea. Mm-hmm. Already back in the 90s, in the 1990s, there was the idea to negotiate such a free trade agreement. So it's more than 20 years old.
Mm.
It always failed up until now, due to several stumbling blocks, I would say, questions that remain quite controversial that are now being discussed. But this is a very old idea, and I would say maybe the global context this time is more prone to make it possible that it will happen.
I see. How about what is the differences between TTIP and other trade agreement by Europe?
Well, I would say the first difference is the size. I already told you this would be the absolutely biggest free trade agreement ever concluded in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the potential impact is therefore also much bigger than other trade agreements the EU or the US have. And the US have huge trade agreements as well. The trade between the EU and the US makes up 50% of world trade.
50% is a pretty large amount, right?
Yeah, 50% of GDP and 1/3 of world trade, which is huge.
Yes.
So the impact would be therefore huge as well. I think there's another big difference compared to other trade agreements the EU has and the US as well, is the level of ambition. Very often free trade agreements about reducing tariffs, so how much you pay when tolls, basically, passing a good or a service across a border. In this case, they want to focus more on what I said before, harmonizing all these regulatory standards on both sides. They also want to open public procurement markets, these kind of things that are quite controversial, but it's very ambitious. So I would say that it is the most ambitious trade agreement. And maybe there's another difference. It's also related to the two other differences I already talked about, is the impact on other states and regions in the world. And I suppose for Malaysia it's also quite relevant. the EU and the US already have many trade agreements with other countries and regions in the world. They have the EU has a customs union with Turkey, for example. It's in an economic area together with Norway, Switzerland, other countries. The US has the North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico, and these countries will be heavily affected by the TTIP.
I see. So with that, why is a European Union, EU itself, is the essential trade partner for United States?
Yes.
Yeah, why is that the essential partner? Why is it the first partner for United States when it comes to agreement? You've already mentioned in terms of it's one of the largest of a sector, but then why has always been the US and the EU itself?
Well,
yeah.
Historic reasons certainly. Political and economical. Well, historically, the ties, political and economic ties between the EU and the US have been very important, and mainly because the US was largely populated at the beginning by European immigrants. And so logically, there was a lot of people and goods and services traded across the Atlantic. We have similar levels of development, which makes it also easier to trade goods because we have a similar demand of products and of services. And then there is a political partnership. I mean, the US and the EU are together partners in NATO, in the defense alliance. They have a political commitment to have very close ties, I think.
I see. All right. So with that, that means the EU is the biggest market in the world, and it has the largest importer of manufactured goods and services, and it's also got the largest stock of investment abroad, and it is the world's largest host of investment by foreign firms. And one of the examples, if I'm not mistaken, is that EU is very good at negotiating free trade agreement. When it came to South Korea and Singapore, EU actually managed to finish the agreement in just 4 years. And the EU is working, I believe it's working hard to open up the more markets through negotiations with other countries, like you mentioned, like perhaps India, Japan, Vietnam, and also Malaysia, our nation itself.
Yes,
yeah,
that is true. The EU has a very proactive trade policy, and that is not restricted to the US at all. We continue to negotiate with many countries. You mentioned several of them. I checked last year. They opened negotiations with Japan, with Morocco, with Thailand, and an investment agreement with China. They are negotiated with several Latin American countries and also with West African countries. It is everywhere in the world, yes.
Yeah. And how about, how are these negotiators being held accountable? So,
yes. So I would say the biggest test for the negotiators is at the end of every free trade agreement negotiation, the agreement has to be approved by the European Parliament. The European Parliament is directly elected by the European people every 5 years. So this year we had parliament elections.
I see.
And they have to approve it. This means that already during the process of negotiation, they have to keep very close contact and consult the members of the European Parliament, because if they don't do it, the agreement will never pass.
So and they will go through the exam and then also exam of the approval as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And how?
I would say
yes.
That is important because it not only guarantees a certain scrutiny, but also democratic legitimacy,
Definitely.
Which if there were no vote at the end, yes.
And how long will the negotiation take, Julie?
That no one knows.
No one knows. Maybe like first round of negotiation, or maybe next few rounds.
They are currently, right now, as we are speaking, they are holding the 7th negotiation round.
I see.
In the US. It always alternatively takes place in Brussels or in the US. And they started, as you said, last year in July. So they have been doing a lot of work in this a bit more than a year. But at the beginning, they were very ambitious and thought that they could finish by the end of this year. Right now, we can see that this is impossible. And that even though they are really quick, it will take several more months or years, I would say.
So, okay, just a summary before we end our first session here. Could you just summarize the current focus and the future prospect of EU trade, European trade partnership with the rest of the world?
How could I summarize? I would say that for the EU, the trade has always been important, but it has become more important now because the EU is suffering a very important economic crisis. And in times of crisis, trade is probably the cheapest way to promote growth and to create jobs. And so they have been focusing on many countries and concluded many agreements. And now the biggest one is the one with the US. And as I just said, this will take some more years. There are people who are a bit pessimistic about it even being possible, actually.
So with that, we'll just end our first session. For the second session, we're going to talk more about the benefits and how the impact of on a certain community and a society in general. So we'll be back.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hello, welcome back to ABC Dialogue. This is Grace. And we still have Julie on the phone. Hello.
Hi.
Yes. For the first session, we talked about just a brief introduction of TTIP. So this TTIP is going to cover many parts of economic, including manufacturing, services, and also agriculture, I believe. And also by removing the barriers to trade, it will provide a boost to economic growth, creating jobs and lower price. And also apart from that, economics, all parts of economic are expected to rise, which is good for jobs. Some sectors will probably increase their exports more than the others. Like, for example, EU exports to US of motor vehicles and are expected to go up a really high percentage. And also at the same time, it's not just a trade between the EU and the US, which is expected to be expanded, like we mentioned before, as a result of increased demand for a lot of ingredients like raw materials, components, and other inputs. EU itself exports to other countries are also pretty much in the growing status. So, Julie, we are going to focus more on the benefits that TTIP will bring to certain countries or globally and also domestically. So may I ask, how would TTIP impact on Europe's trade and business dealings domestically and globally?
Yes, so you said it's a very broad agreement. It's honestly, before saying anything, I would like to say that the impact will depend on the scope of the agreement. So depending how comprehensive the agreement will in the end be, that now we don't know because it's still being negotiated, the impact will be bigger or smaller. So there are different scenarios. In any case, impact will be big because the markets are very big. Certain studies indicate that there could be a boost to the economy of 0.5% annual growth in GDP. They broke it down for us to give an idea of what that would represent for the economy. That would represent for each European family a gain annually of over 500 euros. And in the US, it would be even bigger, and it would be over 600 euros a year for each US American family. But I think it's not only about money. It's also about the possible jobs that this could create on both
Exactly.
sides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, in this context of economic downturn on both sides of the Atlantic, especially in Europe, certain countries have big problems to get out of the crisis. And this could provide a new boost to their economy. It could create new jobs, and thus also help workers to find jobs and businesses to find new opportunities.
So in business sectors, that will definitely help to resolve the problem of this in unemployment issues around the world.
Oh, it would be lovely if with free trade we could solve unemployment issues.
Yes.
I doubt that this is possible, but it is one means how to do it. And it's a very cheap one because you're not obliged to increase taxes or public spending. It is something that comes relatively for free. And so it could increase job opportunities, it could reduce unemployment, and it could increase wages in certain areas. But this doesn't mean that certain European states have to do their homework and also reform a big part of their economy.
Definitely. So this agreement will have to be approved, like you said, by EU, by the Parliament, and also member states. For the Americans, by the U.S. Congress. By removing all these barriers to trade as possible and to the movement itself basically the quicker this happens, the sooner we can start reaping the benefits. And then some changes, it may have the oldest phase over time though. How about the other aspects, Julie? How would TTIP impact Europe's legal and political framework?
Well, TTIP will have an impact on certain rules and standards in Europe. I wouldn't say that is really a legal framework in the sense that a trade agreement does not have an impact on how laws are made, for example, in the EU. So the way that the laws are made in the EU would remain the same. Maybe you also refer to the so-called investment dispute settlement mechanism. So when there is a dispute between a state and a company, for example, because this has been quite controversial here in Brussels, the idea to include such a dispute settlement mechanism in the agreement has faced opposition, mainly because people are worried that companies could use this clause to sue governments when they don't like the legal framework they are facing. So, for example, a US-American firm that is investing in Europe, that is facing certain regulations and certain standards, would then just sue the government, but that is unlikely to happen. And actually, it's interesting to know that already right now, 8 member states of the EU have such clauses together with the US. So it would not be something that is totally new. And
could you elaborate more on that?
Yes, maybe. Yeah. So the investment dispute settlement mechanism is the idea that when a company invests, to give it certain securities, that, for example, a country cannot then just nationalize this firm, or can suddenly decide to ban certain products or something that come from this international company, or to discriminate it in comparison to national companies. This has been going on everywhere in the world. And if you don't have such a clause in an agreement with this other country, the investor, the European investor, for example, that is investing in, there has been several problems have been happening, for example, in Argentina. So I might take this example. If a European investor invests in Argentina and then Argentina decides to nationalize these companies that are owned by European investors, the European investor cannot do anything about it. And by including such a clause, they somehow give a security to the investors. But people have been worried in Europe that US American firms might use that to attack the legal framework of the EU and the way that the EU sets standards, for example, in environment, in health issues, in other areas.
Yes.
But it was so controversial actually that they decided to put it on hold, this chapter.
Oh, I see.
And they organized a public consultation with all the relevant bodies that are interested, and the companies and the working association, trade unions, etc. And they held this public consultation before continuing with the negotiation on that, because it is very controversial.
It is controversial, and then also the standard that the EU holds, the high level of production in EU is pretty, it's already set and it's really firm, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when the citizens, the people do worry about when it comes to consumer, environment or health protection.
Yes, of course. I mean, we are lucky. I mean, European citizens and myself, we are lucky to live in countries where these standards are very high.
Yes.
Our consumer protection standards are very high, health, environment, etc. The safety of products is very high. And of course, people might be worried in principle that these standards are threatened. But this agreement is not negotiating the standards. So these standards will not be lowered. I really doubt that this will happen. I know that it's a fear of many, but honestly, I don't think this will happen. And actually, this is not the mandate of the European Commission to negotiate. The mandate of their negotiation is more to identify certain regulations in the EU and in the US that are just doubling themselves.
So there's definitely room to learn from each other.
Yes, there is definitely. I mean, we are negotiating here with a country that already has also high standards. So sometimes I think we worry a lot for things that I personally believe are not that much of a threat.
Because that will be another step forward to a change, because negotiating with the one of the biggest country, US and EU itself, that actually can bring quite a bit of a worrisome to citizens. That's why they will bring a lot of questions regarding this trade.
Of course.
Yes.
I partly understand their worry in the sense that the US American culture, or also the way of making business, is different of the one in Europe. And they are very open towards a certain practice and certain products which in Europe are I would call them a bit taboo.
Yeah.
Prefer like to genetically modified food, for example. I mean,
Yes.
they exist in Europe, but they are much more restricted than in the US, for example, and certain meat that are treated with hormones, for example, in Europe. But if Europeans don't want it, then they will not get it. I'm honestly, I think it's a bit exaggerated to think that suddenly from one day to another, our supermarkets will be full of this meat, because if the European consumers don't want to buy it, they will just simply not buy it.
So all the safety assessment will be there before this GMO, genetically modified organism, is placed on the market.
Yes, and this will not change. The conclusion of an agreement with the US will not change the way the EU assesses and evaluates if a certain genetically modified product can enter the European market. This is done by a European agency, and they have very strict rules on how they determine if a certain product is allowed to enter the European market. These products are clearly labeled as well, and this will under no circumstance change.
So with that addition, I would love to bring another question in this agriculture area, Julie.
Yes.
Because the negotiation of TTIP definitely includes agriculture.
Yes, it
Yes.
does.
So this agriculture market will have this two-way street benefits for both EU and US. And US is definitely interested in selling more of its agriculture stuff like maize and soy, where EU exports will have more look into more in the dairy stuff or wine or beer. Yeah.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, it's funny because on the one hand, agriculture is of main interest for both partners to open up because Europeans want to sell their wine, their cheese, their chocolate, all these very good products that they want to sell and that currently are highly taxed in the US. And on the other hand, the US, as you said, is a very extensive producer of certain crops and also of cattle.
That's right.
The dilemma is that agriculture was one of the main stumbling blocks until now in the past 20 years. It is also one of the main reasons why the Doha round was never concluded, so in the World Trade Organization. And we have this dilemma, yes. I think it's possible to overcome it. For the Europeans, many producers are calling for including geographical identification, meaning that many European products have a so-called denomination of origin, saying, for example, Parmesan cheese can only be produced in a certain region in Italy under in a certain way, and if it's not done like that, it cannot be called Parmesan cheese.
Definitely, and that's when it comes with the top quality of food.
Exactly. So that is exactly that is the argument, and they would say, I don't know, some Parmesan cheese produced in Estonia will just simply not taste like Parmesan cheese, and this topic is a topic that in the US is handled differently.
Yeah.
They are negotiating on how these denominations can be included.
Definitely.
Yes.
But not only the oldest dairy product when it comes to fruits like apple and pears.
True.
Yes, they also have certain ways of the farming the fruits itself geographically.
Yes, that is true. That is true. It's not only processed products.
Definitely.
Yes. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned pears and apples because there are very, very, very high tariffs in the US to export for European apple and pears. Which personally I don't see the difference. It's an apple and maybe it tastes differently, but I think this is a product where it should be relatively easy to reduce the tariffs. That should not be a problem.
All right. Moving on to the next question, Julie. How would this TTIP impact the European society?
Well, in a broader sense, of course, it will impact society because it might give this boost in Europe that is highly needed for the economy, and it will create job, and this would also take away part of the social and economic pressure that we can feel now. And it is however problematic because in times of crisis, the European society, we are seeing the re-emergence of certain protectionist policies and quite populist political propositions and ideologies that rather tend to say that in times of crisis we have to concentrate on ourselves, that we have to buy national products, that we have to give jobs primarily to national workers, etc. And this is contradictory because it's not going to help the economy. But this is a tendency we can observe. So I really hope that with this agreement, it will also give a boost to liberal parties and to advocates of free trade to say that opening up is actually a good thing in times of crisis. But that is unluckily for now not what we are observing. So I think it could have a very deep impact, not only on the economy, but on the social and political framework of the EU.
Oh, definitely. So the European companies, workers, citizens would benefit enormously from the more open US market. And
Yes.
And the EU has also has many highly competitive firms producing top quality products and services, like we mentioned shortly before, and also including a lot of top brands and leaders as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, some of them are not even known, or many of them we don't know that they are European brands. But this TTIP could give companies open up new markets for companies. It could create new business opportunities. It could create new investment opportunities. And this would have a very big impact.
Exactly. I believe that it will be a win-win situation for both EU and the US, because getting rid of this tariff and other barriers to trade will actually boost and enable these European producers to sell more to the Americans in the USA, of course, and that is good for business and good for creating more jobs and opportunities.
But maybe I want to say something else as well on the impact on European society and the market. It is true that every time that you open up a market and that you deregulate and that you reduce tariffs, it also creates a certain challenge for existing companies, because of course the market becomes more competitive. You have more competitors entering the market.
Well, that's definitely true. Yes.
That means that the workers and the companies will have it also tougher in certain cases, and they will have to adapt in certain cases. And of course there are certain workers and certain companies that are worried about that, because they would rather have more protected markets. However, in the bigger picture for me is important in that case. They will have to adapt, certain companies, but overall I think the competition is a good thing. And competition, if it's fair, it improves the quality and of the products and the services, and it can reduce the price. So for the society overall, it's a very good thing.
Definitely, when the competition is dealt in a healthy manner, you will only go for the positive outcome after all. However, on the other side, could you tell us, because there are a lot of human rights activists that are skeptical of the trade agreement. So why are these TTIP meetings, agreement, regulations, this whole conversation about this a specific trade are done in the secrecy behind the closed door?
Well, the argument of the negotiators is relatively easy. They say that in order to succeed, their negotiations have to be partly the opposition of certain organizations against the meetings, the agreement, because the meetings are secret. What I was saying is that the meetings have to be partly secret, at least, because if not, the negotiations will not conclude. However, members of the European Parliament as well have been raising some caution, because they will in the end have to approve this agreement, and in order for this to happen they have to be involved, at least partly, and regularly informed and consulted on the negotiation. I think both the US and the EU have realized that they have to be a bit more transparent and inform more about what is going on. I think that is what they try to do by putting on hold the chapter on this investment state dispute settlement mechanism we talked about before, and they launched this public consultation. I think that's very important. They also set up a so-called TTIP Advisory Council.
Okay.
Group, I think, is the correct name. And this includes all the relevant stakeholders. So trade unions, business association, consumer protection association, and several NGOs and other civil society organizations are in this advisory group. I think that's the right way to go. Personally, I believe the more information you can give out, the better, as long as it, of course, doesn't threaten the possibility to conclude the agreement. But include the members of the European Parliament is key in that, yes.
I see. We are almost ending our session here, although I would love to go in depth to talk about this TTIP. Just to give it the last question to you, Julie, what's the way forward in your perspective on the trade negotiation on TTIP, and how can Europeans benefit from TTIP? Or should Europeans discontinue the trade talk with the US on TTIP?
Oh, well, to answer your last question first, certainly not. I think they should continue negotiating. It will be more difficult than they thought at the beginning. But compared to the past 20 years, I think if it's possible, then it's possible now. And it will be tough, but it would be also a huge opportunity for businesses, for workers, for investors. We had just this week, it was it's interesting to know we have a new trade commissioner. So there is the European Trade Commissioner who is negotiating in the name of all the member states. It's a woman. She was confirmed today, and she will be now heading these negotiations. I believe that as I already told you, it is in times of economic downturn a great means to boost the economy.
Definitely.
It's also a great means to be more more closely linked to our partners, and I think that is a great opportunity.
So definitely TTIP, the agreement itself, is not about trying to convince each other between EU and USA to change the respective system, but it's rather about the finding ways to make the system work more smoothly and also in a harmonized manner.
Yes, very well put. That is exactly the aim. It's of course to reduce tariffs, but it's mostly about finding mechanisms to recognize other people's regulations. Maybe we could give a small example for seat belts in cars.
Yes.
There are different standards in Europe and in the US.
Definitely, yes.
But seat belts are very safe on both sides. So maybe there could be a mechanism to recognize how the US tests the seat belts, instead of each company having to two different tests for the same thing. I also think that the EU, and sometimes we tend to forget that, but the EU itself is also a free trade project. It was a project based aiming at peace, but it's also a project of free trade. We have a common market, which is the biggest market in the world. And I think it's our identity, it's our DNA as European to continue this opening up of markets, as long as it, of course, doesn't threaten the quality of life of Europeans. But in this case, it will certainly improve quality of life of Europeans.
Definitely. Unfortunately, we have to end our session here, Julie. But then thank you so much for participating for our show. And it was
Thank you for inviting me. The pleasure was mine.
Yeah, it was a really, really great talk and a lot of information that's shared on this show. So thank you so much. And then we look forward to hear more positive news from this agreement in the future.
Yes, maybe in a year we should do another interview.
Oh, definitely. Thankfully, we'll get back to you, Julie. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.